This is your first and final spoiler warning for the entirety of Attack on Titan. Ymir, Historia, and Eren are all very entertaining characters in their own ways, but what makes them truly amazing for me is how well they parallel each other while also foiling one another's perspectives to expose their own flaws. The crux of their character arcs revolve around the concept of living your life in a way that you can be proud of. Living for yourself, an ideology Ymir introduces into the story. A conflict between selfishness and selflessness. Today, I'm going to be talking about Historia, Ymir, and Eren, and how they learn what it means for them to live for no one but themselves. Historia and Ymir's relationship in particular is interesting because of how similar they are, while also being exact opposites. On many occasions throughout the story, there will be a conversation between the two that goes something like this. Ymir will accuse Historia of trying to do good deeds which will appear outwardly angelic, but when dissected, they are clearly selfish acts that go against this facade. She also comments on the self-destructive nature of these acts. Historia pretends to care about rescuing Daz, but she's only really helping him because she wants to be seen as heroic. Historia meekly denies these accusations. Likewise, Historia will accuse Ymir of doing genuinely selfless deeds under the guise of selfish reasoning, which Ymir will also deny. Why do these characters act the way they do? Fundamentally, they behave like this because they are lonely. They both wanted to be goddesses. Historia had two main types of influences growing up. The first was Frida, who told her that she should grow up to be someone people loved and relied on, like Ymir Fritz, the founder, a goddess. The second was almost everyone else she knew, being ignored by everyone she grew up with, bullied by the local kids, and reading about families who loved each other. She realized how lonely she really was. Both of these influences culminated in creating a girl who was hyper-fixated and obsessed with trying to impress and live for others. When her mother was killed in front of her eyes and her last words were that Historia shouldn't have been born, that idea stuck with her. Given her new name, Krista would go on to be suicidal and self-sacrificial, believing that she shouldn't have existed. From the moment she was born, Ymir was unimportant trash. Nobody in the world cared about her. She was lonely, but she found that if she gave up agency in her life and acted as a false goddess, she could also receive false misdirected admiration. But that was good enough for her. All she had to do was live her life in a way that others wanted her to, and yet still, people hated her, and she was backstabbed by her own worshippers. Being hated clearly hurt her. Being treated by everyone as though she didn't deserve to exist made her realize her own unimportance, and the insignificance of every single person in the world. And this realization taught her that she had no one to live for but herself. Historia would actually succeed in making most people believe she was the goddess she wanted to be. The only person she couldn't trick was her best friend, Ymir. Ymir herself can be seen on multiple instances being nice to other people purely out of the good of her heart, such as when she lies to Connie to try and cheer him up, rescues Daz, or the fact that she's only in the Survey Corps to help Historia, though the persona she plays would have most people believe otherwise. The only person able to break down this facade is Historia herself. Ymir admits that her idea of living selfishly is her way of getting revenge on the people who made her feel like she didn't deserve to be born, which ironically means that she's still living for other people. When Historia sees that Ymir could become a Titan, she is terrified and in disbelief, because she thinks Ymir may be an enemy of humanity, her biggest fear. Because to Historia, humanity is the group she seeks validation from. Even still, she takes the first step in her growth, dropping the good girl facade, and embraces Ymir's ideology by telling her to tear down the tower, and then admitting to her that her real name is Historia. After being separated from Historia, Ymir is conflicted about what decision she should make. She's so desperate to see Historia again that she would even jeopardize her future just to see her one last time. And it's at this point in the story when Ymir starts to realize what she always truly wanted. She tells Historia she wants to take her somewhere where no one will say that it would have been better if she was never born. Ymir is a lonely girl, and she cries out to Historia to please save her, to which Historia replies that no matter what, she'll always be on her side. Around this time, Berthold says something similar. He and Reiner are traitors, estranged from their friends at the Survey Corps, and like Ymir, he calls for someone, anyone, to please find them. Ymir answers those calls. She leaves Historia within the walls and decides to go with Berthold, where she will certainly be killed, claiming that she did it to pay back a debt to him. Immediately, it would appear as though there's a clear contradiction between Ymir's actions here and her overall ideology. Why would someone who claims to live for herself choose an act of self-sacrifice in order to rescue someone else over self-preservation? But that's just it. Living for yourself does not equal self-preservation. Living a life you can be proud of doesn't mean being selfish. Deep down, Ymir has always been a kind, selfless girl who does nice things for others. She had spent so long focusing on being selfish in order to spite the people who hated her that she forgot what she truly wanted. Someone who accepted her, and someone who didn't make her feel like she shouldn't have been born. Someone like Historia. And although Historia wanted Ymir to stay with her, what Ymir wanted was to be that person for someone else. Being a goddess doesn't feel so bad either. Historia is not able to accept Ymir leaving her. She's depressed, but despite this, she goes back to living by her old name and, for once, admits that she isn't particularly worried about her teammates. This is when Eren sees through Historia and tells her that he likes her more now that she's honest about her feelings, and asks her, what does she want to do? Levi uses her new name as an opportunity to force another role onto her, the Queen, and she agrees, not realizing that she's once again living for another person. When she sees that her dad seems to love her, she once again falls into the trap of trying to please other people. She wants her dad to accept her, and justifies his actions and belittles Grisha with the rationale that Rod Race is protecting humanity, and Grisha is an enemy to it. An enemy of humanity is someone that nobody likes. An enemy of humanity is lonely. To avoid this, Historia has to accept the role her dad forces onto her and eats Eren. She wants to believe that she can be good for other people. She's so close to becoming what Krista always wanted to be, a goddess. When Eren tells Historia that he never needed to exist, she understands exactly what he's going through, and as she tries to convince herself that she should eat him, that she should live up to her father's expectations, she remembers what Ymir asked of her. So she does what she truly wants to do, and becomes what she had always feared the most. She becomes what she always has been, and she commits the ultimate act of selfishness. She becomes an enemy of humanity. She chooses to risk her life on the front lines despite Erwin's judgment, kills her dad, and punches Levi to prove that she's becoming queen of her own will. What I find ironic about this situation is that after becoming queen, the children of the orphanage refer to her as a goddess. Historia made Eren into the monster that massacred 80% of humanity. She taught him to live for himself. Eren Yeager was cursed with godlike powers. Zeke accuses Grisha of forcing the role of a devil onto Eren, which we see to be false. In fact, we learn the exact opposite, as Eren uses this power to coax Grisha into murdering the Race family. Eren takes the sins of his father that once broke him and led him to believe that he shouldn't have been born, and makes them his own. But why is he able to do this? It's because, much like Ymir, Eren learns time and time again just how insignificant he is. He learns that he isn't special at all. Carla once told the commander of the Survey Corps that she doesn't care if Eren never turns out to be special, simply because he was born into this world. This is a philosophy Eren would also adopt. If there is a single truth about Eren, then it's that he fights for freedom. From the moment we are born, we are all free. People who reject that, no matter how strong they are, don't matter. It doesn't matter how terrifying the world is. It doesn't matter how cruel the world is. Fight. This ideology that Eren holds is inherently selfish, and it's also the most basic and most genuine truth about him. But if that's in Eren's nature, then I also want to talk about the other half of Eren, the part of Eren that was born from the influence of the world onto him. After Eren finds out about his Titan powers, he's forced to shoulder the burden of the hopes, lives, and dreams of all the people within the walls. First and foremost, he himself wants to be the hope of humanity, but there's also Pixies, who urges him to cover up the hole, Levi, who continuously demands of him to choose, and finally Petra, who tells him that the choice he should go with is to trust in his friends. So he chooses not to do what he wants for himself, and instead leaves it up to them, which causes them all to die. Time and time again, he is forced to face the reality that he isn't anything special. He has just been given special powers, a curse. Like Ymir, he realizes that his own insignificance, his own uselessness, and the fact that he has never been humanity's hope, means that there's only one thing he can do. He has to believe in himself. As I said earlier, this conversation between Eren and Historia is the moment when he truly starts down the road to becoming a monster. Historia tells him that they can't just let themselves die because they're enemies of humanity. This sentiment would be echoed once Eren learned about humanity outside the walls, and the threat they pose not only to Eldia, but to his friends that he has been fighting for. He can't just let Paradis die because they are enemies to humanity. And after all the murder, all the guilt, and all the regrets Eren had about the rumbling, he whines to Armin like the broken man that he is. He says he had to do all this, because he needed to reach the future he saw in his jumbled up memories. He selfishly murdered 80% of humanity, but he also selflessly died in order to save his friends. Among all the nonsense he spews to Armin, he also says something extremely interesting. He says that he would have still flattened the world even if he didn't know he would be stopped. But why? He vaguely remembers his dad giving him his name and telling him he is free as he is born. He did this because he wanted to, because he had to, because this is the person that he truly is. He has always been this way. Historia taught him to live his life truthfully to himself, and if there is a single truth about Eren, then it's that he fights for freedom. Why? Because he was born into this world.